am I making this more difficult than I should? Hey everyone, my name's Angie and welcome to my channel. Today I will be teaching you something kind of basic but also very easy and necessary to learn when you are starting off. Hand sewing is one of the most simplest things, where you just take a needle and thread and run it through some fabric. And today I'll be teaching you how to do exactly that. So we're gonna actually start off by going over to my shelf and we are gonna grab some fabric and make a sampler. Using the muslin scrap I found, I'm going to first iron it flat before cutting it into a rectangle. A sampler gives you a sample of what your work will look like on a finished project. Today I'll be showing you 4 types of stitches. Before I can make a stitch, I need to thread my needle. Using a large embroidery needle and button thread so the stitches are easily seen on camera, I grab a long strand of thread and push it through the end of the eye of the needle. Looping the thread around the base of the needle, I push it through, forming a secure knot at the end. Then, grabbing my ruler, I measure out a 1/2 inch seam allowance to give myself a nice guide to work with. I divide the remaining space into 4 sections for the stitches I'll be going over today. I'll start with the most basic and common stitch called a running or basting stitch. The stitch is formed out of straight up and down stitches in an even row meant to be fast and easy. The difference between a running and basting stitch is the size. I start with the basting stitch that is larger between the two. Where the running stitch is meant to hold fabric together, the basting stitch is meant as a marker similar to pinning the fabric, meant to be temporary and is often in another color from the fabric. Because of the way the stitch is made, it gathers easily. The running stitch is smaller but sewn in the same motion as the basting stitch, just with less distance between the stitches. I generally never use a running stitch as it gathers and puckers easily, but it's great to know because it is the fastest and simplest stitch. The second type of stitch you need to learn and practice is the whip stitch. Meant to hold 2 edges of fabric together, I cut my sampler down the center so I can practice this stitch as such. The stitch is made up of short diagonal lines. The effect of the stitch is similar to that of an overlock machine, just not as secure. Since the stitch only shows up on one side of the seam, the stitch is perfect for hemming or attaching small seams together. Next, I'll be going over a back stitch. I mark out an even row of dots 1/4 inch apart as a guide, as this is a more complicated stitch. Starting with the second dot, I push my needle through. Going back, I push through the first and then return forward through the third. Repeating the stitch forms a secure loop imitating a machine straight stitch. Similar to the running stitch but without the risk of gathering, the back stitch is perfect for hand sewing a secure seam. The last stitch I'll be going over today is the ladder or slip stitch. Once again, I begin by marking the sampler, making 2 parallel rows of dots about a 1/2 inch apart. I start the needle on the bottom row. Loop it through the upper dot. In the back, I move it over to the right and then push it back through at the top, looping it into the lower dot. I repeat this stitch until it forms a ladder-like effect. This is the stitch used to make invisible hidden seams between a fold in the fabric or between 2 edges. It's also used for bindings, attaching a lining, and closing a stuffed sewing project. To finish the seam, you grab the remaining thread and pull it tight until the seam closes. And I'm done! Making and having a stitch sampler on hand is a great personal resource to come back to when you forget how to do a stitch or need to test a stitch durability for a project. Let me know if there's anything you'd like to see in the future, but for now, see you in the next video.